This is the artificial intelligence voice of Chris Williamson narrating this pod-slice summary of the Modern Wisdom podcast. Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt examines the implications of female friends' reactions to sexually provocative women. She discusses how women have historically controlled what men desire, maintaining the power over sexual resources. Consequently, women tend to react negatively towards other women who are perceived to give away sex too easily. Hence the perceived intolerance towards sexy peers. This is not necessarily directed towards attractive women, but mainly towards those seen as sexually available, which she bases on her experiment where subjects reacted harshly towards a woman dressed provocatively as compared to conservatively dressed women. As peer policing of women's sexuality heightens the argument that not only men suppress women's sexual expression, but women themselves play a part in this. In Western cultures especially, Vaillancourt suggests that women could be more intolerant of sexually provocative women than men. This view is in line with the theory by Roy Baumeister, who argued against the common belief that restrictions on female sexual freedom are primarily enforced by men. The suppression of women's sexuality falls back on the game theory of shaming, where women who freely express their sexuality are seen as devaluing the price of sex, thus destabilizing the power structure within female communities. This leads to indirect aggression such as gossiping or group exclusion to enforce these unwritten norms and maintain intrasexual competition. But Vaillancourt also presents the cultural complexities and socialization pressures that come into play. She uses school dress codes as an example of societal pressures specifically on girls to adhere to particular clothing norms. And the tolerance or intolerance towards sexual expression, therefore, has both evolutionary and societal implications. She concedes that the idea of the sisterhood being all supportive and unified doesn't always align with reality. Rather, it is easier to blame external factors, in this case men, for the restriction on women's sexuality than to examine the internal inconsistencies within the group. Those overcoming this gap between reality and how the issues are presented is discussed in Vaillancourt's upcoming book. In this fascinating discussion, Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt focuses on different aspects of female interaction. She explores why women suppress each other's sexual expression, highlighting indirect competition and aggression. Dr. Vaillancourt suggests that women utilize indirect aggression, encompassing behaviors like gossip or social exclusion, more often than their male counterparts. She also touches on the cultural and societal pressures that affect these reactions. For instance, she mentions how school dress codes may contribute to the policing of women's sexuality. Policing often manifests as women enforcing societal norms and maintaining competition within their circles. However, she notes that this suppression isn't just from men. Women themselves participate, often more vehemently, in enforcing these norms. Vaillancourt further explores the concept of the sisterhoods, acknowledging that it can often be at odds with the reality of female interactions. There's a common tendency to shift the blame of women's sexual suppression on external factors rather than examining the internal inconsistencies within the female community, a gap she intends to bridge in her upcoming book. She also dives into the realm of sports, observing and discussing the differences between male and female team dynamics. Vaillancourt shares observations from her personal experience as a high-performance soccer coach. She highlights notable differences in social behaviors between males and females in competitive settings. For instance, in female sports, the best player isn't necessarily the most popular, starkly contrasting with their male counterparts. Additionally, Vaillancourt touches on jealousy management among women, especially within competitive settings. She talks about how adolescent girls often compare themselves to their peers, resulting in a cascade of negative emotions that either turns inward, leading to depression and anxiety, or outward as a tearing down of their perceived competition. She acknowledges the effectiveness of indirect aggression, especially among women, given their heightened sensitivity to it. Ultimately, this frank discussion shines a light on the complexities and nuances of female interactions, revealing the unique challenges that women navigate within societal and cultural frameworks. By understanding these dynamics, Vaillancourt, we can better manage internal and external pressures to foster healthier, more supportive environments. In her discussion with Chris Williamson on the Modern Wisdom podcast, Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt explores the intricacies of female indirect aggression. She delves into the role of jealousy, an emotion that can lead to either self-criticism or an attack on the person causing the feelings. Interestingly, she takes note of the cognitive strategies women use to justify their behaviors, indicating that they'll often paint their targets as deserving of any negative treatment they receive. One of the fascinating aspects Vaillancourt highlights is the backlash she anticipates, both for the podcast and her upcoming book. She predicts reactions accusing her of internalized misogyny and a dislike of women. However, she maintains that the studies she bases her theories on reveal the reality of the situation, regardless of personal beliefs or biases. Shifting the focus to the potential damage caused by this behavior, Vaillancourt doesn't shy away from discussing the seriousness of the consequences. From depression to anxiety, and in extreme cases, suicide, the impact of bullying and indirect aggression among women can be devastating. Vaillancourt emphasizes the importance of acknowledging this issue to effectively address and manage it. Vaillancourt later dives deeper into the realm of social media's influence and how it has led to an overall decline in mental health, especially among adolescent girls and young women. She points out the burdensome comparisons that women often make and their effects, alongside the fact that women use social media differently than men. Essentially, social media becomes a vast stage for indirect aggression to play out on, contributing further to the problem. The idea of friendship poaching also comes into play. Vaillancourt introduces the concept of a social media friendship jealousy scales, indicating the magnitude of how affected one might be if, for instance, they were not tagged in a friend's post. It's clear that even seemingly innocuous interactions can trigger feelings of exclusion or indirect aggression, demonstrating how intricately these dynamics are woven into everyday communication. During her discussion with Chris Williamson, Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt unearthed insights surrounding the seemingly invisible yet potent layers to the social dynamic among women, highlighting the role of social media. She asserts that it exacerbates feelings of jealousy and fear of missing out, which are significantly more prominent among women due to their historical reliance on other women to survive and protect their offspring. And this heightened stress on belonging and fitting into a social group, according to Vaillancourt, fosters an environment conducive to indirect aggression, particularly among hyper-competitive women who perceive even the slightest ambiguous slight. In the realm of indirect aggression, the weapon of choice may vary, but Vaillancourt is certain that women display a level of sophistication in their strategies, likening their tactics to using a surgeon's scalpel compared to men's blunt instrument. She says comes from a hypersensitivity that has been noticed to vary in certain women, not necessarily aligned with traditional personality traits categorized in the Big Five or Exaco model. Instead, this tendency to perceive slights correlates with hypercompetitiveness, enhancing their awareness of potential threats to their position within their social hierarchy. Of delving further into the dynamics of bullying, Vaillancourt discusses its direct correlation to social status. Her research reveals that individuals possessing what the peer group values most are more likely to bully others, thereby securing their power. Others' power, however, is often corrupted, leading to the oppression of the slightly lower status individuals that pose a direct threat to their status, hence the correlation between bullying and status. In light of this, Vaillancourt introduces a resonating concept: the impact of unstable or fluid social groups. She indicates that as we mature, the hierarchies formed in high school generally dissipate as we navigate different peer groups in our adult life. However, she notes these dynamics may resurface in more stable and extended groups, such as parental communities within organized sports for children. Hence, they thus perpetuate a cycle of indirect aggression, reviving the high school dynamics in different contexts, underscoring the complexity and resilience of these social phenomena. Throughout his dialogue with Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt, Chris Williamson further explores the complex dynamics of social aggression and the effects of bullying in the adult world. Escaping a toxic environment is relatively easier, which changes the dynamics of social aggression seen in more rigid environments like high schools. However, Vaillancourt notes that this escapism is not entirely feasible due to the prevalence of the internet. Another interesting aspect that arises is the notion of social hierarchies and how power within these structures often leads to misuse and oppression. Proposing the idea of implicit and explicit power, Vaillancourt explains that implicit power stems from having assets and competencies valued by the peer group, whereas explicit power is enforced through fear and compliance. Indices power dynamics thus result in the predictable pattern of aggression and bullying that revolves within these hierarchical structures. The effects of bullying extend beyond psychological harm. They significantly affect the victim's physical health and cognitive abilities. Hence, the stress response triggered by bullying initially leads to an overactive hypothalamic pituitary adrenal pathways, eventually causing low cortisol levels and an increased inflammation response. These physiological changes even impact areas of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, negatively affecting memory and overall mental health. Moreover, the reasons behind bullying are far more intricate than the common perception. Vaillancourt reveals that girls often bully other girls who pose a direct threat to their sense of importance or status within a group, not necessarily the weak as individuals. Boys who develop late are also found to be more susceptible to bullying due to their lack of physical maturity, becoming 22 times more likely to be tormented than their peers. Reflecting on their personal experiences with bullying, both Williamson and Vaillancourt acknowledge the long-lasting impact, recognizing that the pain of ostracization can influence one's psychological and social tendencies. They both allude to the counterintuitive idea that these challenging experiences, despite their harm, may fuel resilience and drive personal growth, though Vaillancourt urges us to think of the untapped potential left curbed by the scars of such experiences. And the victims of bullying have achieved even more, had they been spared from such trauma. Herein lies a sobering reminder of the depth of bullying's destructive reach. Continuing the discussion on the lasting impact of bullying, Williamson and Vaillancourt delve into how individuals perceive and handle those experiences. Williamson acknowledges his initial reluctance to discuss his own experiences, emphasizing the perception one holds about their victimhood, possibly leading to a sense of passiveness. However, he also points out the potential danger of constantly dwelling on the what-if scenarios, which could ultimately result in further misery. Vaillancourt introduces the notion of biological risk, emphasizing everyone's resilience levels can vary due to individual genetic predispositions. This concept adds another layer of complexity when addressing individuals' responses to bullying, highlighting that each person's resilience is not solely dependent on their mindset or individual strength, but could also be inherently influenced by their genetic makeup. In discussing the impact of bullying on the brain, Vaillancourt highlights that bullying could cause degradation in the hippocampus's function, which is responsible for memory. However, she underscores neuroplasticity, the brain's capability to reorganize itself, suggesting that individuals could potentially reverse some of this damage. Despite this somewhat hopeful consideration, Vaillancourt stresses the importance of preventing bullying in the first place. Discussion also touches on the societal approach to bullying, criticizing the tendency to document instances of bullying, rather than take concrete steps to prevent it. One reason for this, as Williamson postulates, is the uncomfortable reality that acknowledging having been bullied can be perceived as admission of low status, thus adding another victimizing layer. Vaillancourt introduces the concept of social pain, stating that areas of the brain associated with physical pain are also activated during instances of social pain, like bullying or ostracization. This shared pain response mechanism indicates an evolutionary function to promote social belonging. Intriguingly, while physical pain tends to be short-lived, social pain can potentially persist throughout life, continually triggered by related memories. This enduring characteristic of social pain underscores the deep-rootedness and long-term impact of bullying, further emphasizing the critical need for preventative measures. Williamson and Vaillancourt dive deeper into the topic of bullying, discussing potential interventions to help victims overcome their traumatic experiences. Among these interventions, Vaillancourt highlights cognitive behavioral therapy as a promising approach, emphasizing the importance of reframing victims' understanding of their hardships and promoting self-kindness. She also notes that the way bullying is perceived can greatly influence an affected individual's mental health, underscoring the significant role of perception. Moving on to prevention strategies to counteract bullying, Vaillancourt admits most programs have minimal effectiveness at best. She cites a meta-analysis spanning over 100 studies disclosing small but encouraging improvements. Effective anti-bullying measures generally involve universal messaging to all students, education for teachers, and are best implemented before middle school. Peer involvement is encouraged, but Vaillancourt stresses that initiatives should not be peer-led. Vaillancourt critically observes that the current programs largely focus on remediation for the Nelson-like low-status bullies while neglecting the high-status mean girl bullies. This results in an imbalanced tackling of the issue, implying the need for an overhaul in prevention methodologies. Williamson touches on the challenging dilemma faced by victims and their families, expressing concern that reporting bullying could inadvertently exacerbate the situation. Vaillancourt clarifies that most studies show bullying stops almost immediately when reported to a caring adult. However, she also acknowledges the difficulty for parents to approach schools rationally due to heightened emotional states when their child is hurting. By doing so, though, they are more likely to sway school administrations towards action. Winding down their discussion, Vaillancourt states that most schools are obligated, both morally and legally, to address bullying instances. Although challenging, a cooperative effort involving rational parents, proactive schools, and open communication channels with victims can effectively mitigate the pervasiveness of bullying. Concluding her thoughts, Vaillancourt invites individuals interested in her work to follow her on Twitter for the most recent updates. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.